Well, thanks for the invitation to come and speak. I feel like I'm kind of playing top trumps here. My name's Mike Smith. I work at Pfizer. I have been at Pfizer 29 years last week. And one of the questions that people ask, how many R users are there at Pfizer? I did a poll last year, and there was 1,500 people had downloaded R at Pfizer. In our MS Teams community that I'm building, we now have over 900 people in the MS Teams for R in Pfizer. And this is part of what I'm doing, leading the R Center of Excellence, is building a community of users at R at Pfizer. I call myself a professional geek. I trained as a statistician, started life at Pfizer as a statistician, went into modeling and simulation, doing very much the kind of simulation stuff that we've just heard about. But then gravitated towards looking after R, making sure people had the right R packages, looking after the systems and all of that kind of infrastructure. And today I've jumped back to the stats organization. I'm continuing to do that kind of job, including things like sorting out Docker and all those good things. But that's not really what I'm here to talk about today. That's another talk on another occasion. You might find that one online. Anyway, what I'm here to talk about today is when you have a Shiny app and you develop a Shiny app and you just stuff everything in there. Widgets and everything and the whole data side of things comes into your app, and it probably looks a bit like this car here. If anyone has taken stuff to college or taken stuff to the tip, I'm sure your car has looked like this at some point. Right? Here's a typical app that I see. Right, and these apps are not written by professional developers. These apps are written by statisticians, by programmers, by clinical pharmacologists, people who just want to practice using Shiny and doing some fun stuff, right? Because creating apps with Shiny is fun. Right, so you get your data, and you retrieve your data from some source, or you upload your data, and then you spend a lot of code munging that data, pulling it apart, wrangling it, getting it ready for doing what you want to do. Eventually, you get to the bit where you summarize and you visualize and you provide that nice feedback to the people who are going to use your app. And frankly, that's the fun stuff. Getting to that bit where you're summarizing and visualizing, that's the bit that actually is the nice bit to do. The other bit about getting data is boring but necessary, right? No fun at all. You're just grinding through getting things in the right shape, right? Also, potentially resource-intensive and time-consuming. Time-consuming as far as the app goes, time-consuming as far as you're concerned in writing that code and validating that code and making sure that that code works and is fault-free. Okay. So to the rescue comes pins. Little straw poll in the audience, who's used pins already? Nice. Okay, so if you've never used pins, I'm going to explain roughly what pins does. So what I'm intending here is that, let's say, yeah, there you go. So imagine that in your Shiny app has a way to query some place, some board, and say, could you go and get me some data, please? Right? And the pins board isn't just for data. It could be a Plumber API for a model. So your Shiny app could say, pass these inputs into my model and go and run my model with those inputs, please. It could be as simple as like an image, like a visualization, or data or a table or anything, right? So imagine that you just have this pins board, it contains content, and your app is saying, could you run off and get that content for me? So the lovely thing about pins is that it's not just for you, but it's for anyone else that's wanting to get access to that data. So you need the data for today, but if a colleague also needs that same data for a different app, rather than having two versions of the data, you have one version of the data that both apps then call into, okay? And within Pfizer, we have RStudio Connect, but there are a variety of different ways that you can actually host a board. It's versioned. So if I upload and wrangle my data and pin it to the RStudio Connect board, if I do the same tomorrow, then I know that I can see the versions of that data. It's secured, so I can make sure that it's only me that gets access to this data, or it's only me and Colin that gets access to this data. But when I give Colin access to that data, then the two of us are seeing the same data, which is really nice, right? Because we're trying to avoid having Colin's app with exactly the same data wrangling as my app over here, right? And if we rely on that same data, then it's good that we're both accessing the same data source. So for pins, it's actually deceptively easy, especially if you're using RStudio Connect, because you say, I'd like to register this board where I'm going to put stuff, and then when I need to get stuff, I'm saying pin get off that board, and my username is here, so that then if Colin needs to get that data, he puts in my username and my content, and will get exactly the same data as me. It's as simple as that, right? So what I'm proposing here is that that data wrangling bit happens outside the app, right? Don't put it in your server.r, handle it outside the app, pin it to RStudio Connect, right? And then the Shiny app focuses on this bit, which is the bit that Shiny does well, it does quickly, and the app code is simpler. You've got much, much less to QC, verify, check, because you're just saying, go get my data, pull it in. I'm going to do something like apply a filter, which is easy, and then do the fun stuff, right? So here's an example Shiny app. I'm not going to demo anything, don't worry. So in one of the systems that I've been involved in developing at Pfizer, one of the questions was, how can we be sure whether people who are going to use this app, whether they've got 16 gigs of RAM on their laptop, and whether they have the latest versions of software that work well with this platform, okay? So usually when you have this kind of question, the IT organization comes in and goes, I know, we'll fire up a project. Let's get a project manager. Let's get a technical writer. Let's get all of these other people. Let's get 15 people into the room to start speccing out how this is going to work. And I said, well, if you can give me a read-only access to the database where all of this information is housed, and if you can give me someone in the IT organization to write an SQL query for me, my SQL query writing is rubbish. Also, if you get an IT person to do the SQL query and it's malformed and it runs slow or doesn't perform very well, you just go back and say, can I have a new one? So anyway, I got that SQL query. I got access to the database. So now I can pull the hardware information for everybody's laptop. I can pull what software they have installed. I can merge it. I can compare against some expectations that says, our version 4.1 will work. Our version 3.7.5 won't. And then display that information for each individual user. So normally, what you would do is that you would wang all of that into a server.r, and it would take quite a lot of effort. To be honest, that was probably my first pass at doing this, right? And I'm not saying it's bad, right? I'm just saying that there might be a better way, okay? So we go to the database, we pull the hardware information, we pull the software information. Oh, and by the way, there's a list of emails out here of users that I want to do this for. You merge that information, you compare it against the expectation, and then you have a nice little report within your Shiny app that says, this is what we know about your machine. Right. So instead, the other part of this whole process is, if you're doing all of that bit within the app and your query against the database fails, or if there's some value in there that causes your merge to fail, your whole app stops. And that's not a good thing. So instead, what I did was to do this step as R Markdown scheduled reports in RStudio Connect. So I've got a little report that pulls the hardware. I've got a little report that pulls the software and then compares them and then pins those results to the RStudio Connect database board and merges hardware and software to give me all the information I need. Right? As I say, this is a scheduled report through RStudio Connect. You could do a cron job, you could do whatever works for you, right? But this happens nightly. If it fails, I get a warning, right? So I get an email that says, building this report failed, right? Which means I go in and I look at the R markdown and I figure out what's happened and I try and fix it, right? But what it means now for my Shiny app is that my Shiny app is super simple. It says, go get data, compare against the expectations, and show the report, right? Simples. If your nightly refresh of the data fails, not only does it not crash your app, right, but you can spin up your app, and basically you're looking at a set of data that's a day out of date, right? It's yesterday's data as opposed to today's data. That's probably not bad. How often do your colleagues get new hardware? How often do they install software? It might be daily, but it might be okay if you're a kind of day or so out of date. But your app could use the last available information and still run and still give a report. The other thing was that I discovered pin reactive. So once I had this app up and running, it was working well. The next thing I thought was, well, what about users who are new? So let's have a little box that they fill in that goes, put your email in here, and then we'll pin that as well, so that then that updates, that adds that person to the nightly report list. And they won't get the information immediately, but at least they'll be included in tomorrow's run. So what I did was that I had a little box that said add a new user. We do pin reactive back to the board, and pin reactive there means that there's that kind of crosstalk between what's in the app and what's pinned. And it means that when they add themselves as a new user, they can see that their name is now on the drop-down list, and they know that it didn't just disappear. Okay, so that's nice, and it means that we can then kind of add new features into the app quite easily. So, take-home message is that using pins allows you to offload the data manipulation part, right? It makes working with others for the same data, it ensures that you're both working off the same data source, which is a great thing. It makes your Shiny app and your server code much, much simpler to write, less complex. You can access the data at any time outside of your app because it's on the RStudio connector on the pins board. At any moment outside the app, you can go and say, pin get, show me my data, let's see what's going on here. Does it all look sensible? And you don't need to inspect it via the app. And also, if that data pre-processing fails for any reason, your app continues to work. It's just a little bit out of date, perhaps. And one suggestion from a colleague is the easy way around this is just to have a little sort of metadata date stamp on your app that says data was correct as of date X, right? Easy. So how to make Shiny apps easy, right? If you have access to RStudio or to a pins board. Thank you. That's all I was going to say.